Beep, 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 beep. Beep, 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 beep. Blah, 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 blah.
Meow. Just to rub against every leg.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. All right, we're recording.
What?
Welcome to another episode of the BOBCAST Patreon podcast. I'm Bob.
I'm Grace. Wrath Destroyer.
And today, we are examining the topic of cinematic combat, suggested on Patreon by Rick. Remember that all patrons can suggest topics pretty much whenever, so just message me on Discord or comment on this post. Anyway, Rick said, how to make combat more cinematic, e.g., placing terrain features for the players to use, chandeliers to swing from, bookcases that can be toppled, chairs used as an improvised weapon or shield, tables that can be flipped over to provide cover, etc. And I really like this one because I feel like cinematic combat, it's one of these things that I don't know, it sounds like such an attractive idea. So Grace, do we need cinematic combat? I asked you as you're yawning.
Yes, we do.
But do we want it all the time?
Depends on how cinematic you're getting. Not every combat needs to have the intensity of a storm-tossed
Michael Bay.
ship at sea, lens flares everywhere, that sound, wah, that,
Yeah.
that one
Wah.
sound, wah.
Yeah, I agree. I think that's a 5e thing maybe because it's so superhero-y, so epic, or can get that way very quickly, pretty much level 5 and up. I think we have a tendency to want things to be very superhero-y and cinematic because those things go very much hand in hand today. Yeah, and so you don't have to strive for it in every battle. I don't know, how much of it do you think comes down to just how you describe things as a DM versus the things that are there for your players to interact with? Of course, I guess you would put those there, but what do you think?
I thought I was going to sneeze, but then I didn't.
Good.
I guess it's both, because if you as the DM are describing lots of things around to be used, then your players are going to use those things,
Yeah. Well, I guess I'm looking at it as there's one, I primarily in the past have run my more cinematic combats, just trying to think of it as whether I'm the player or the DM, I'm just really describing what I'm doing. It's all flavor most of the time in those ways.
Yeah.
It's when you finish, when you get that, how do you want to do this or whatever. Either I as the DM would just describe that finishing blow in a cool way, or as a player I would try to do that in a cool way. So it's how much do you think, cinematic combat could rely on just something like that, or do you think it should be this more tangible mechanical thing where the terrain is really involved?
I kind of think it's less fun if you make it mechanical. Because then you have to worry about what are the rules for this.
Yeah.
How can I do this without breaking the combat and such?
Yeah. Because then I guess you totally get into realism versus just fantasy and fun stuff.
It's way more fun to just describe someone doing a flip than to have them roll to do a flip.
Yeah. Yeah, totally. Well,
which I do if a person is proficient in acrobatics,
in flips,
or it's not a difficult flip, then they can just do a flip.
Yeah.
If, for example, they're trying to flip over a burning log,
yeah,
that requires a roll.
Yeah, and that totally comes down to this thing that I've been having to remind myself of lately, which is rolls are for when the failure would matter too.
Or when failure is possible.
But not just, I don't think it's just when it's possible. I don't know, let's say this is a pretty athletic character. Character standing on an even plane, and they want to just do a jump in the air and do a front flip. I would say as long as they're a pretty athletic character, fine. Because you could fail, but who cares if you fail?
Yeah.
Whereas I think you would only need to roll if instead of this even plane, they're on a raft on water now, and if you mess up that flip, you're gonna fall in the water or something. I don't know, that's just first thing that comes to my head. But when the failure actually has a consequence, instead of just oh, okay, I get back up. But yeah, that's a little bit of a sidetrack. Yeah, with cinematic combat, you can have a lot of interesting things, but you shouldn't try to like design mechanics for each of them. Because then it's also like, and in another combat, you'll like haphazardly describe there's a crate in the corner, and one of your players will remember, oh wait, but that crate did like 2d6 damage when I threw it at somebody last time, you know, and it'll be like little things like that you then need to like memorize as part of your house rules.
I actually have a player who uses a lot of improvised weapons, because, you know, I do like no non-lethal spell casting, but this character doesn't want to hurt people.
Okay.
So they like, what the most memorable one was when they threw a paint can full of red paint and like doused this enemy in red paint, and it did like 1 damage because it was an improvised weapon.
Okay.
And then like it actually made the battle worse because then their friend
getting covered in paint,
or the like the main enemy, the more tough one, thought that severe wounds had been done to his companion
because it was red.
Because it was red paint, and he thought it was blood, so he just attacked.
Yeah. Oh man. Well, I mean, but just in general, like, I don't know. That sounds pretty. Like, I don't know if it's cinematic.
It was a cool moment.
But it's like I think that's cinematic combat already, just because it's so like off the wall, and it's so much more than like I sword with my sword kind of move.
Yeah.
Which is like what way too much D&D defaults to. Yeah, I think that also is a good thing to talk about. Like, what is the bar for cinema in this discussion?
Yeah.
Because I feel like you could totally go from people not even describing anything to then just leveling it up to like just describing some cool moves.
Yeah.
That's it.
Usually when a player is like attacking in one of my games and they give just like a little bit of a description of what they do, I tend to just then elaborate on that using my like DM descriptive skills.
Yeah. For DMs, I think it's like just build on what your players give you. Like hopefully they're describing their move in some way, like whether it's a martial thing or a spell attack. But then you can just capitalize on like what they've given you and try to give it like a little extra flair, which is usually pretty easy to do. You know, it takes some practice, I guess, to like get comfortable with that and to not be super repetitive about it. I feel like that's one thing I could fall into even when I'm working off of like somebody else's idea. But yeah, just trying to enhance whatever has already been said is usually easier than coming up with an original idea.
I don't know. I feel like I'm not awesome at describing things because when I go to do it, there's like so many things going on in my head that I often forget important details, like there are 2 doors in this room.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, I forget that kind of stuff all the time.
Or like, here's the main part of the puzzle that you should be focusing on. Just like forget that because I'm focused on the smaller, flavorful details.
Well, and I think that's why this is like one of these topics that like will come up again and again, because people always want to like be adding this stuff to their game, but ultimately a lot of it, you know, it's just like the cherry on top kind of stuff. Like you don't need cinematic combat to have a great D&D session. It's just like one extra piece that can be there to enhance things.
Enhance.
Exactly like that. Yeah, so I guess like one sort of a background tip. I don't know if that's audible. Our cat is scritching and scratching in the background right now.
Bippy.
What was I saying? Oh yeah. So another thing to like make sure your combat or whatever you want to work on in that session. Like you can't work on this stuff until your main stuff. What are the enemies you plan to use or like hope that will show up in that session? You know, what are the places they're going to go to? What are the NPCs' names? Have that basic stuff down first. Because otherwise, and maybe have it written down so you don't forget that kind of stuff. And then, you know, once your other main prep is in place is when you can really work on a skill like cinematic combat or whatever. Are we like kind of saying it's more like an improvised thing? That's kind of what I feel like I'm leaning toward.
Yeah. I mean, I don't write out what's going to happen if someone scores a crit in a battle.
Yeah.
Also, I get really self-conscious when I'm reading flavor text.
Really?
Yeah,
because
I don't want people. Well, most of the time I wrote it, and then I'm reading it, and I like don't want people to know, because like there's a difference in like tone between just saying something and reading something that is written. Or at
Yeah.
least I feel like there is.
Yeah, I
And
agree.
for whatever reason, I'm like, I don't want anyone to know that I'm reading flavor text. So
that
then
I'm reading them my poetry.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, I think I used to feel that more, but the more I used it in my games, and I did write my own for a long, long time, and I still do, like, here and there. I mostly, like, will find flavor text and then adjust it now, because even though this is not sponsored, I recommend you check out Describe. It's really awesome, and it's, like, the one tool I use a lot.
I bet Describe is really good for cinematic combat.
Yeah.
Help with that.
I mean, I don't know. They're crap. I wish I, like, knew off the top of my head. I mostly think of their categories as, like, places, spells. So, like, the spells would totally be useful. Monsters. And now they are... I mean, again, this is, like, kind of a weird tangent. But they're soon, like, this year, going to be launching a players collection. Or, like, a players membership that is all, like, first person. So it is meant to be, like, for you describe... Like, for players describing their own stuff. And I guess, of course, a DM could use it, too. So I think that could be, like, kind of a literal game changer for many people. I guess another thing it comes down to then, at the end of the day, like, because Describe is just a source of professionally written text. So I think just reading, like, fantasy is probably another great way to, like, good fantasy is going to be a way to get a good sense of,
Good
like, how to describe combat.
Subjective.
Yeah. I don't know. Like, I can't, like, attest to this too much, but I've heard, what's his face? Who's the guy who writes Conan?
The Barbarian?
Yeah.
I don't know.
Yeah, I can't think of his name. It's Robert E. Howard, I think. I'll say, like, friend of the channel, Professor DM on Dungeon Craft. He has some videos, like, recommending reading literature like that, where there's, like, a lot of fight scenes and, like, and it's fantasy style, and it's just done in, like, a cool way. I think, like, watching movies with good action as well could help. It just gives you ideas for how to describe, like, where blows are landing and stuff like that. Treating it flavorfully, like we said before, instead of mechanically, is a way better way to handle it. Because as, like, a finisher move or whatever, you can totally say crap like, yeah, and I sliced him in half, or like my arrow went right into his eye. And, like, mid-combat, that kind of stuff could have a mechanical effect, and then, well, obviously the slicing in half.
Then you're getting into called shots, which is a whole thing. Yeah.
Well, we can have a little aside about that, because one thing I wanted to bring up during this discussion was this cool feature, like a really cool feature, that I recently read about in the Dungeon Crawl Classics core book that the warrior class has. So it's basically your fighter type. It's totally martial based. And it has this thing called a deed dice, where instead of a static attack bonus, you roll a dice. It starts out as a D3, because there's weird dice in this. But you could think of this a lot like the proficiency dice optional roll that's already in 5e. Instead of having a static proficiency bonus, you would actually roll a dice each time. But the cool thing about what this can do for martial characters is it means that if there's ever a time, and it's built in so it happens more often really, but whenever there's a time that you're like, yeah, I want to trip this guy, or, like, push him so he falls down the stairs, or try to blind him, or, I don't know, cut off his ear or something. But the point is, it's just super flexible. So then whenever you're rolling this D3 with your attack, with your D20 attack roll, and if you get the maximum, so if you get that 3, you successfully do the thing that you wanted to do. So it just, like, keeps it super rules light, and it's just an easy way to determine whether you succeeded or failed at having this cool, they call them deeds, whatever, with your attack.
Yeah. I mean, that probably works in Dungeon Crawl Classics, but the thing about called shots in D&D is, like, if you can do it to the enemy can do it to you.
Yeah.
And so if you're going to start blinding your enemies by shooting their eyes out with arrows, they should be able to do that to you, too. I mean, if you want an even playing field, and you as the player, or your character, stands far less of a chance against monsters while blinded than monsters do against you.
Maybe, yeah. I mean, I definitely agree with, like, within some bounds, like, whatever you can do, the monsters can do. But again, that's like a class feature. So you could compare that with, like,
yeah, I mean, I guess if you were going to say that, like, only fighters can do this,
yeah,
then that's probably fine.
Yeah.
I still don't recommend it, though.
Again, yeah, that's why, like, called shots in general, So it's got to be used within reason. And of course, I'm sure other people will be like, but then that's like
the one time
Battlemaster
I
maneuvers.
allowed called shots was when you guys were playing Out of the Abyss and you were underleveled to fight Karazakar, the Beholder.
Oh, yeah.
So I allowed you to shoot out its eyes to reduce the number of eye beams it would have.
Yeah, and that also, it's pretty cinematic too.
That was a cinematic fight.
Yeah.
It probably would have been less cinematic if you hadn't destroyed all the scaffolding.
Yeah, it was a cool location though, because it was like a couple hundred feet.
It was 1,000 foot drop into a hole.
Wow. I would say called shot kind of stuff does work cool against, like you said, either a way more powerful enemy than the party should be fighting, or just like a really big enemy, because then it could be like you're attacking parts of it. I think that's pretty neat.
Yeah, if you were playing like Dragon's Dogma style, where you could like latch onto its leg and slow it down that way.
Yeah, anything that your characters could like reasonably climb, I think they should be able to attack individual parts of it.
Yeah.
And again, I don't have like hard and fast rules for that. I know the DMG does have like a little optional rule for climbing onto monsters, but like I don't know what it is and I don't really care. It's like I feel like as long as maybe they make an athletics checks to climb like they would climbing anything else. And then if it's trying to rip them off, maybe some opposed checks.
And there are some like epic monsters. I'm thinking of Mythic Odysseys of Theros. There's this one Kraken that when you reduce it to 0 hit points, it goes into like mythic mode. And then you do have to take out like individual points on its body.
Oh, well, that's cool. Like its legs or something?
No, it has like a shell, and the shell like starts breaking away, I guess, and you like beat up the like some kind of goosack or something.
That. Yeah, I mean, once in a one shot that I ran, I created this enemy that was like a giant like golden golem. What's the word I'm looking for? Construct is what I'm looking for, and it ended up being like way too powerful. So I had it that like as they were fighting it, parts of the armor were like breaking off to like reduce the AC. And so in a way, it that had a little bit of a mechanical thing, but it still was like an on-the-fly decision to do that, just as basically a justification for me like wanting to lower its AC mid-combat. Yeah. And that was also a really cool location though, because it was like in this giant treasure vault. The thing had like a gold breath weapon that could like petrify you, like but in gold. It was really cool. I got to use that monster again someday. What's like the most cinematic combat you think you've ever like?
Probably in Out of the Abyss when you guys were fighting Grazit, even though that was like extremely emotionally difficult battle for me because it just like wasn't going well, but it had so much potential to be really cool, but he kept like using darkness and teleporting.
Okay.
And just like messing with you until you got frustrated.
I don't know. There are definitely other combats in that campaign that stand out to me more.
Well, which ones?
I mean, I'm thinking of, it's still like the other frustrating ones probably that we've talked about on the podcast are like the hag, the earthen hag things.
Cave hags.
Cave hags, where we were like, being, again, kind of like petrified, like stuck in place. But that and the other battle, that was similarly frustrating.
Anything with Shawl?
Yeah, was that the lady who could like just be ethereal and then
yeah.
Because even though, I don't know, there was a lot of like movement and like, oh my gosh. So I'm really trying to like envision it, really trying to imagine the scene as we're doing it.
Ah, Shawl. Both my greatest treasure and my worst mistake.
Yeah. And that's reminding me of just something like thinking of our epic white dragon, I'll just say, attack in Dragon of Icefire Peak. Because even though it was like it was not even really a combat because you pretty much just like one-shotted it, that still felt like cinematic to me. Because it was still like this climactic encounter on a roof of this fortress. Like, I think that's probably half of it, is just having a cool location.
Yeah, and we did a little bit of setup.
Yeah, there was a lot of build-up.
Moving ourselves around the battlefield.
Yeah, like it totally was well-earned. Yeah. Ready to read some comments and questions?
Yeah.
Okay. In the Patreon Discord, I posted, what are your questions and ideas for this topic? Just in the general chat. So keep an eye out for our next one. I did tag everyone if you'd like to have your questions and comments in this podcast. But Drip Monkey said, definitely using rough terrain whenever outside the confines of a city. It gives a sense of realness to the world and allows the players to utilize the environment to their advantage, or at very least get them thinking. You can use it to make lower CR counters more interesting. Yeah, and use rough or distinct terrain to make what would be a walkthrough encounter into something more challenging. Also trees, rocks, whatever to block certain spaces. Yeah, that's touches on what we said, adding a little detail to a cool location, and you can have this stuff, but don't feel the need to give it super mechanical consequences or mechanical.
Yeah. I'm not a huge fan of, using difficult terrain because it just makes everybody slower.
Yeah, so that's actually a great point. He doesn't say, I replied to this, trees, rocks, crates, definitely a good idea. Rough terrain, because that's the word he used. As in difficult terrain everywhere outside a city might be a bit much.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think just rough terrain as in there's a cliff in the middle of your combat field, or there's changing in elevation, stuff like that is really cool. Maybe a little patch of an icy, iced over pool, thorns or something, lava, but not the whole space.
Yeah. It's definitely better if your enemies have a way to use that to their advantage at first. Yeah. And then the PCs have to somehow take over those advantageous situations.
Get the high ground.
So get the high ground. Get that one little stump in the middle of the briar patch to stand on.
Yeah.
Etc.
Yeah, I like that. Definitely. And that actually connects really well to another comment here. I find that adding an objective beyond kill the enemies, this is from Brendan, aka Mustard Tiger. Adding an objective beyond killing the enemies / survive makes combat more interesting. And he even said, not sure if that counts as cinematic, but I think it definitely lends itself toward the cinema of a fight when your characters have to do something, or maybe they don't even have to, but it'd be way easier of a fight if they got to that place, like we were just saying.
Yeah.
Maybe the objective isn't a place. That's very much what a King of the Hill style match. But if it's just retrieve the thing without it being too much crunch, where it's just they need to save this person. Maybe that's the real objective. They don't need to kill whatever's guarding the NPC. They just need to get the NPC. And if they can find some other way around it, or distract it, or tie it up or something, those are all cool things.
Or what's cool and cinematic? Hold off a horde of monsters until reinforcements arrive. Because then you have yes, there's tons of monsters all around you, everybody's fighting, and you can just keep the enemies coming wave after wave without the PCs just feeling hopeless, because it's yes, there's more people coming to help, and we just have to get through until
Well, that's a really good comment too. Just having what is it called? Swarms kinds of enemies, or minions or whatever. That's totally cinematic. When you just have 1 HP bad guys and you let your characters actually slice through more than one with their attacks or something.
Yeah, Hyrule Warriors style.
Yeah. I mean, just because that was one of the many things that when I didn't know how to play D&D, but we were playing it anyway, especially our one party member who was playing a barbarian type character, had a big axe and he would sweep through guys. And that's just, it makes sense. Why wouldn't he be able to swing through a few little guys with his giant axe? Yeah. And it looks cool in our brains.
In our mind brains.
Yeah. I had one other comment here replying to somebody. I guess this was just something I came up with while responding to one. I'm thinking about varying lighting mid-combat could also be interesting, but it's not something I've tried. What do you think about that? Actually, you probably like it because that's what you just said about the darkness guy.
Yeah. Casting darkness when the enemy can see through darkness. That's always cool.
Yeah. And I mean, I guess...
I've done that.
Yeah.
I'd do it again.
Yeah.
And I will.
No. And how I was saying, this isn't exactly a lighting thing, but I guess I would still just... it falls under visibility, how that one creature was able to phase into the ethereal plane super easily and then come back out in different places.
It was a succubus with the ability to go ethereal as a bonus action. Do not
Yeah.
recommend unless you want to kill your party.
Well, yeah. Or they're like, I don't know at what level we were. Maybe like 7.
Well, to be fair to myself, she wasn't trying to kill you
Yeah.
in either situation.
Yeah, I think we just took it that way.
Yeah.
Well, she like stole something from us the first time, so I was trying to chase her. I mean, whoa, another neat cinematic thing is like chases, totally. And that's another thing there are rules for in the DMG, but like these things like chases, mass combat, like it's so easy to fall into like, oh, I need to like learn how the rules work for this, but you don't. I don't know, maybe it's easier to use the chase rules than just relying on like everybody's movement speed and stuff, but I think it's easier to just like hand wave a lot of it and be like, okay, who's the fastest character? Who's the slowest character in the party? Are you all trying to follow this thing? Just conceptualize like how many rounds it might take to catch up, and then maybe have them roll once or twice for some kind of complication. It can go really quickly and not have to like be stuck in combat rounds and like very calculated out movement and stuff like that. Because that was my mistake the one time I ran mass combat.
Yeah.
And it lasted like a session and a half.
Yeah, that was...
Yeah. Like in my head, I was like, my plan, I was like, this would be just going to be so cool. But it ended up just being really boring.
Yeah. I think the way Out of the Abyss did mass combat was pretty good because, spoilers for Out of the Abyss.
Spoiler alert.
Spoiler, when you're all like fighting the Pudding King and his like army of oozes.
Mr. Pudding.
The way that Out of the Abyss did it was like your party is running through this battle and every once in a while you'll be assaulted by a couple slimes. You just have to fight your way through the group of slimes to continue toward the objective of the Pudding King and then fighting him. Black puddings and ochre jellies. And
Yeah, that's actually really serious.
it wasn't
like
for the
80
level
FMs.
that you guys were.
Yeah. As long as you have a okay sense of like scaling it to your party, it's easy to, like we've been saying, kind of hand wave or just like improvise a lot of this stuff. It depends on the group you're playing with. Like if you are a super mathematically inclined DM who like really wants it to all be worked out and legit, then it'll be fun for you to read those rules and play that way. But I think widely speaking, the combats of D&D are more cinematic when it's like fast and loose. It's reminding me of like if you have characters, you know, your party sneaking up on like some sleeping enemies. You could have them all like roll to attack and then like roll their damage when realistically they should just be able to like freaking stab them in the heart and that's it. The latter is way more cinematic, and in that case, I'd also feel like realistic at the same time.
I like doing it in Skyrim, so...
Yeah, see?
So, like, yeah, if someone comes up with, like, a really good plan to, like, sneak into the king's chambers and...
The king? Wow.
You kill the king in Skyrim.
Oh, okay.
Spoilers for Skyrim.
Spoilers for this 10-year-old game.
Yeah. I mean, if someone is defenseless, then it's just a coup de grace.
Exactly. Cool. De Grace. We done? We solved this one?
Yeah, I think we solved it.
Yeah. So let me know down in the comments how have you succeeded with cinematic combat, and most importantly, leave some other ideas for future topics, things that you would like to hear us muse about for a bit, and then take your questions and comments about before we do these, because I'm finding the podcast quite fun this way with a little segment in here.
I like segments.
Yeah. All right. Keep building.
Stop building.
And that's what she says. Bye.